Hey guys, what is up? My name is Kaylee. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going into part 2 of my January 2019 wrap-up, the novels. Alright, if you saw part 1 then you already know, but I'll re-explain that I've decided going forward, because I read so many things in a month, I'm going to split my wrap-up into 2. I'll do a video for my graphic novels and manga, and I'll do a video for my novels and other things. That way, if you prefer one over the other, you can just watch the one. That way I can talk more excessively about the books that I've read. That way I'm not editing a 45-minute video and posting a 30+ minute video. 2 parts, that's what I feel like doing. Wow, the sunset is gorgeous. That's how it's going to go from now on. As you know, also, I do my wrap-ups based on least liked to most liked, and because this will be the year of DNFing books instead of pushing through them, I will do DNFs first to get them out of the way. That is to say, I did have a DNF this month. So I have 1 DNF, 1 book that I didn't rate, and I'll explain why later. I have 1 novella, the rest are novels. In total, I read 10 things plus the DNF, so half of another, 10.5 we'll go with. 1 was a 3-star, 7 were 4 stars, 1 lone 5-star. It was a pretty decent reading month outside of the DNF. Let's get into it. For what I DNF'd, it was a book that I really didn't think that I would DNF. The writer, or half of the writing team anyway, is one of my absolute most favorites. This book I've owned since before I had children, like 6, 7, probably close to a decade worth of years. Finally tried to pick it up. There's a reason I waited so long to do it, I guess, because I just couldn't get into it, and that is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I know. All of my friends on Goodreads loved it, 4 or 5 stars. I got really far in. Like, probably that far in. Can you see? Over 50%. I'm not appreciating the humor. I am not following the storyline. I don't really care about what's happening. The gist of it is that these demons are supposed to do this big bait and switch with the baby, so that like the next, like the Antichrist is raised for a family, like to a family, and it's an experiment, except I don't really care. There was like a fuck up in it, and then the demons that decided to do this plan didn't know until later, like years later, and there's one witch that prophesized how the world would truly go, and like no one read her prophecies, but they were exact. I don't really know. More than halfway through and I was not following it, and it makes me feel dumb to admit that, honestly, that I wasn't understanding or following, and I don't know if I just didn't care, like my headspace wasn't there, but there you have it. I DNF'd it because that's one of my goals this year, is instead of making myself read a book that I am just not enjoying. There's not enough time in the world. I have a whole TBR cart, and it put me in a slump when I decided to stop reading it. I still hadn't commit to stopping. I hadn't commit to the idea of stopping it, so I stopped reading anything for 3 days, and that's a lot of days to go without reading. I mean, I read snippets here and there of Mistborn, but that was it, so I'm waving it around a lot, but this will get unhauled in my next unhaul, and I'm sad about it, but there you have it. Moving right along to what I didn't rate, and the reason is that the book is very much not for my age group. It is probably even below middle grade, the very, very most middle grade, but it's also Neil Gaiman, and it came in a set that I got for Christmas, and that is Fortunately the Milk by Neil Gaiman. Very cute. I read it in like one sitting. I took a bath and read this when I was having a bad day. I just needed to reset myself. Actually, I believe it was because I was in the slump, and I was like, let me just pick something up that I know will probably be mindless and creative, and that's what it was. I didn't want to rate it because it's not for me, clearly, but it was fun and cute. It's about 2 kids whose mom goes on a business trip, and they're out of milk, so the dad goes to the corner store to get the milk, but he's gone forever, and when he comes back, he tells them the whole story of what happened to him when he went to get the milk, and that includes being abducted by aliens, and then a whole crazy adventure with a flying dinosaur, and it's really cute if you want to read middle grade or you have children that are into this level of reading. Check it out. My first 3-star was actually a novella that I downloaded on Amazon. I do believe it was free, and it was a novella post one of the novels. You'll see it later. Restarted it. That is The Legend of the Golden Raven by Kay Ancrum. It was kind of a supplemental story to The Wicker King. I don't think it was a necessary story to tell. It kind of goes back and reimagines parts that you've already read for a different perspective, and I found myself skimming it. It just wasn't necessary. I read it because it was free and it took a day maybe, but I didn't gain anything from it. I'm really excited for Kay Ancrum's next novel that comes out that is, I believe, like companion in the same way that Becky Albertalli's characters are. Same characters, different focus, but I didn't think the novella was really necessary, so 3 stars. It was okay. I should say too that I haven't decided yet how to tackle whether I was successful in my TBR picks for the month, but I think I'll do it in my novel section and say that this month I did read everything that was chosen for or by me. Really proud of myself, pat on the back. And I did in fact read the pre-orders that came in this month, so that was my other goal. When a book is pre-ordered or bought, I want to read it the same month that I get it, unless it's at the very bitter end, obviously, of a month. That said, one of my pre-orders and anticipated reads of the month comes in at a 4-star for me, probably closer to a 3.5, bumped up because of the ending, and that is The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is a very much loved series on BookTube, and if you watched my vlog while I was reading it, you already kind of have an idea as to my feelings on it. It is a sequel to The Wicked King. Wait, The Wicked King is the book. It is a sequel to The Cruel Prince. In The Cruel Prince, there's a fairyland that a human and her human sister have to come and live in. They are stolen by their eldest sister's true dad, who is a fairy from fairyland, and he kills their parents so that they will come live with him in this fairyland. And it is very hard for a human to live in this land where they have no magic. People kind of look down on them and play tricks on them, and it's a very political story. And just like in The Cruel Prince, in my opinion, there's book 1 and book 2, and book 2 happens much further into the story, probably close to 75% plus. Book 2 will start in both The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King, and in my opinion, the first books are a lot of filler of nothingness, very vague story progression, and then book 2 is where everything happens. I can't say that I like that in the series. I'm not a big fan of the drag for the big reveal, but the big reveal always ends up being big enough to carry on. So here we are at a 4-star, rounded up due to the end. I can't exactly say what happens in this because it would ruin things for the first book, or I don't want spoilers. This book is still very new, and I don't want to be that person because Twitter has been full of spoilers for all these anticipated, highly, highly looked forward to new releases, and I'm not going to be that person. But know that this wasn't my favorite. The series is not my favorite. It's also not awful. I will buy and read The Queen of Nothing next year when it comes out, but I really hope that it's not book 1 of Nothing and then book 2, bam. I think I'm less alone than I thought I was, but I know that I'm kind of like an offshoot of most people who absolutely love Jude and Cardan, and I think it's the only redeeming factor through book 1 is the relationship dynamic between the two. My next 4-star read was a read-along that I committed to later in the game, but the reviews for it were coming in and I got intrigued and picked it up from my library, and that is The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum. I obviously talked about the novella earlier. Mel from Mel to the Any and Amy from A Court of Crowns and Quills hosts this read-along called Dragons and Tea Book Club. They pick a monthly book and you can read along if you want to, and this was their pick. This is a story about 2 guys in high school. One of them is slowly progressing down a path of poorer and poorer mental health, and you can see from the pages that they get darker and darker and darker until it gets black. It was a very interesting story about the relationship dynamic of loving someone who is suffering from mental illness, and also what it's like to be someone who's progressively getting worse in their mental illness, and kind of the relationships outside of them and how it's affected. I really, really liked how they wrapped up the story, and it's told very quick, like little, it's almost like journal entries worth of chapters without it actually being journal entries. I enjoyed how it was almost like magical realism. I loved how the story was told and it didn't go too much into unnecessary information. So for that I gave it a 4-star. I think it kind of missed the mark a little bit, but I can't exactly distinguish why. I think it just got a little repetitive with how, like, August kind of becomes repetitive in his feelings for Jack, but that might just be me personally. I really like how they tackle the representation. Obviously there's some trigger warnings for a lot of things. Tread with caution, because the kids are neglected, and it's kind of heart-wrenching in that, to see that these kids really could have benefit from adults that gave a shit about them. My next 4-star is In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. This is part of the Wayward Children series. I love the series so much. I wish that we could get them faster. I know that that's a very large demand on a writer, trust me, I know. Not asking anyone to actually publish them faster, but one a year is just too little, too spread out. I really love what Seanan McGuire does with the stories. Essentially the first one is about, because this is the 4th in the series, how kids in their youth that kind of need an extra in their world, doors open to them into a world that they kind of belong to based on their personality, is how I would say it. In the first book it's about those kids that have come back home into the real universe that they were born into and how to deal with it, and some of them are still trying to find their doors again, and some of them are just trying to cope with knowing they'll never do that, and they're just wanting to be back in their real world. Since that first novel, we've actually been able to go into other worlds, and this is no exception. This one is about Lundy, who is a teacher at the Home for the Wayward Children, and you get her background story, and this has not been my favorite in the series. My favorite, for reference, is Down Among the Sticks and Bones, which tends to not be everyone else's favorite. I really liked that and the exploration of those characters. This felt a little surface. It's Lundy in a goblin market, and I didn't really feel the goblin market the way I wanted to. The story ended up being more about the relationship between Lundy and her father, but it didn't really commit one way or the other, and I felt a little wishy-washy. In the end, I was pleased with it, but it wasn't my favorite in the series, so it's hard to judge them against each other. But like Beneath the Sugar Sky, it just wasn't my favorite, but it was good, and thus 4-star. My battery died, so if anything shifted, I apologize. My next 4-star is Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen M. McManus, and I gave it a 4-star. I really liked Karen M. McManus's first release, which is One of Us is Lying. So when I put Two Can Keep a Secret on hold at the library before it was released, it came out in January, I was the first in line. It is a YA thriller. This one is about a set of twins, a boy and a girl, who are sent back to their mother's hometown after she, in like a pill-induced driving incident, crashes and has to go to rehab. Their mother has an addiction problem because her twin, when they were younger, disappeared. So they move back to the hometown in which that happened to live with their grandmother and go to the same school. And that town has a history of homecoming queens going missing. And it starts again. And they have to figure out what's happening now, and is it related to what happened to their aunt. The reason I gave it a 4-star, I really loved One of Us is Lying. The ending can be problematic for some people, I have since realized, and I can understand that. And I think the same people that might have had an issue with One of Us is Lying may also not entirely love Two Can Keep a Secret. I, in particular, didn't love the ending. I loved the book all the way up to the reveal, in which I think the reveal was a little bit lazily done. Was I shocked? Yes. I didn't guess right. But I also think there's something to be said with doing that in a way where your audience has a hard time believing it. I didn't think it was fleshed out enough to have a reason for the ending. Without giving anything away, I hope that makes enough sense. But I don't think the killer, the reason for all the missing girls, was fleshed out enough to make the reveal a punch. More or less I was like, okay, it's passable. It could have been better. So it was a 4-star read. Obviously trigger warnings for sexual assault, abuse. It's a thriller, so the things that happen to the characters are a little bit stomach churning. Know that going in. I think if you're a thriller reader, you know that that tends to be how thrillers go, so you'll be very surprised by it. But it was alright, it was a 4-star read. My next 4-star read is by one of my favorite authors, Victoria Schwab's This Savage Song. This was my husband's pick for my TBR in January, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't speed through it, I thought it would. It read very fast. It's about a world in which there are monsters. There are 3 types of monsters, and then there are humans. The humans, in order to be safe from the monsters, pay off one of the characters' dads, who gives them, you know, some kind of immunity, more or less, if they wear a coin. So you're getting 2 perspectives. One is the perspective of that man's daughter, and the other is of a monster on the other side of town, and how they kind of clash, both in how they view the city and the things happening in it, and then what happens when they have to work together for the sake of their lives. I enjoyed it a lot. I don't think it's her best work, but also I have to keep in mind that it's written for a younger audience, but I did really enjoy it, and I do look forward to reading Our Dark Duet, and I'm hoping to get to it this month, but it's kind of like a stretch goal if I do. Very solid 4-star. Next on my list is I finally completed a trilogy that I very much was excited about finishing, and I don't know why I put it off as long as I did, and that is Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I gave this a solid 4-star, so just to recap the whole series, Illuminae was a very easy 5-star for me. I listened to the audiobook with a full cast. Gemina was a 4-star for me, also listened to the audiobook with a full cast, and Obsidio was also a 4-star for me. I read it both in physical and ebook form, and I listened to the full cast audio, which was an experience to do both. If you want to read this series, I highly recommend doing that. It like ruined audiobooks for me to be able to do both at the same time. The cast was amazing, and probably part of the reason it was such a high rating. Now I will say, so the Illuminae Files is basically about war in space, and to give you more than that would kind of spoil the series. There are a lot of characters to juggle. You kind of get the perspective of one group in the first, and then a different set in the second, and then they all kind of come together in the end for Obsidio. The reason it's a 4-star and not a 5-star for me is that the end wraps up a little too neatly for my liking. Not to say that I need a devastating end for a book to get a 5-star, but based on all the trauma and things that these characters went through, I was kind of jaw-droppy over how this series was set up to end. That said though, I'm not huge on sci-fi in general. I do like it, but it's not my favorite. And this trilogy was a sci-fi story that I'll think about for many, many years to come. I still think about it, and I hear the voices in my head, and the characters feel like friends. I don't know how else to say that without sounding corny. But yeah, it was the whole series was a very solid series. Overall, I give it 4.5 stars. My 4.5-star read, it wasn't quite a 5-star, but it was definitely better than a 4-star, is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin O'Leary Saenz. If you've been here on my channel before, you may know that Junot Diaz is one of my favorite writers from my past. He's kind of a problematic person in general, but if you have read his work and you like his style, you would really like Aristotle and Dante. It's fast, it's got the same kind of voice and cadence. I had heard really good things about it, and I had put it on hold at the library months ago, and it finally came in, and I sped through it, and it broke my fucking heart. I cried throughout it, both happy tears and sad tears. I fell in love with Aristotle. Dante is just the most wholesome character I've seen in a book in a while. The dynamics of their relationship, how it ebbed and flowed, and the exploration of masculinity, of sexuality, of what love means, of parental and child relationships. Everything that happened within that story packed a punch and was done so beautifully. If it's sounds like something that's up your alley, don't hesitate to get it. I didn't expect it. It was the first thing that I read this year, and it was quite a way to start the year. And last but not least, and if you know me, you already know, my number one, my 5-star of January 2019, The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. This book I've anticipated for a long time. This book had a lot on the line. This book has set the bar for all other fantasy trilogies that I will ever read, because I have not read a trilogy that wrapped up so wonderfully, so perfectly, so unexpectedly as this did. The Bear and the Nightingale, the original story, is about a girl, Vasya, who is a witch in a family that is religious and doesn't believe in witches, and she wants to be free. She wants to not be married and bear children as a woman in her life where she is in society should expect to do. And she and the Winter King kind of become a connection. And it's a story about her becoming a woman in her own way, about the Winter King, Morozko, learning about humanity. And you have both the human war aspect, but also the demon, I don't want to call it a war, but the demon versus human dynamic. So there's really two stories going on at once. And the whole time I was reading this, I was thinking, we're getting to the conclusion much too fast. And about halfway through you get partly a conclusion, and it was what I expected the story to amount to, and then more happened. And the more is really what sold this book to me for the rest of my life. I wept. I wept tears of joy and sadness, and I think that Catherine couldn't have written a better ending. There's a scene in which Vasya comes out to people that are just regular people, and she's with Morozko, and she mentions that they're staring at her as though something miraculous has happened. Something, what's the word that she uses specifically? Like, when a thing happens and it's a miracle, like a miracle. And she recognizes why they feel that way, that she is that to them, but she just feels like herself. She just feels like Vasya. And it was just the series in a nutshell for me right there in that scene, is that it's just a story about a girl finding herself and becoming herself and being allowed to do so. But at the same time, it is just so much more. If you like The Bear and the Nightingale and you haven't finished the series out, don't waste any more time. Get your hands on it. I went to a Catherine Arden event, and she was fantastic and eloquent and intelligent and put her heart and soul into this story, and it shows. It's a solid 5-star. I'm gonna have a hard time finding a book that does for me what this did for me the rest of the year. So we'll see. There's a lot of months left, but the contender started in January, and ain't that something. That is it for me, guys. If you haven't seen the graphic novel / manga section of my wrap up from January, I'll have it linked down below. Otherwise, that's it. It was a really great reading month. I think overall I read 16 items and DNF'd 1. Not so bad for the start of the year. I hope you guys had a great January. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, what you thought, especially some of the new releases. I'd like to discuss them. Let me know down below. Hit like if you've liked this video. Subscribe if you're new here and want more content from me. Thank you for being here so much. We can be friends on other platforms. I have my links to social media down below. I hope to see you in the next one, guys. Have a great February. Bye. Can you tell? I just didn't fucking care.